Don't be ashamed to learn things that you need to know. Here's Sexplanations with Dr. Doe.
Episode 45 of the Sexplanations podcast with Ashley Wylde. Woo!
Woo!
Woo! Woo!
Woo!
Your partner works at a company that used to be owned by the person who contracts and produces Sexplanations. That's how we met.
That is how we met.
But you do all sorts of things related to sexuality and gender and children, which is like another crossover in our lives. And what else? What are their common things? YouTube. You're a YouTuber.
And kids is a big one, I think. Yeah. Creative stuff and then children.
Because I am a pretty constant foster parent and
I work in the social work field and primarily with children in crisis. So with a lot of kids who are coming in and out of the foster system.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we're both YouTubers. Mm-hmm. Do you take that identity?
Yeah. I would say like if there's a list of 10 identities, it's maybe like lower, but it's certainly on the list.
Well, yeah. And it's a good one for us to talk about because you do tag videos and travel blogs and then you talk about identity and gender.
I know. I like to talk about educational things, but I also like to be a human. Mm-hmm. And I think where you can find a balance between those things is really exciting for me.
Okay. Tell me more.
Well, I like talking about gender and sexuality. And I don't know about teaching as so much as presenting my experience or the experiences of other people for educational purposes. Like, I think that's enjoyable and that's really fun. But also, I have like a life. I really love to travel and I like to do interesting and different things sometimes too. So on my channel, I'm trying to strike a balance between those two things where it's, yes, there's the informational content, but also I have this human element of these are just things I experience and enjoy that are not so much for education or, outreach.
Yeah. So you're a smart vlogger.
I guess. I mean, if you're going to name me that, I'll take it. I think if I wrote that in my bio or something, that probably wouldn't work.
No, you can put it in quotation marks.
And then I can just cite Dr. Lindsay Doe, and it'll look really professional because it's from a doctor.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. There you go.
That works. I
Done.
like that. I'm doing that.
Good. Tagline accomplished. Awesome. Well, this episode is supported by our Patreon people, Sexplanauts. Specifically Joanna and Donna Flint. They pledged at the boss level, so I'm giving them this special shout out because
boss level.
Yeah.
Love it.
They basically get to tell me what to do because I received the monies from them.
Yep, definitely. Well, I'm endeared to them as well for being a part of the podcast that they are sponsoring.
Yeah, they're sweethearts. So this is for them. And then what I was hoping we could talk about is all identity.
Okay.
Because 4 years ago, Nick Jenkins, who was the videographer, editor, and director of Sexplanations at the time, he took over the channel for that episode. And I think I was on vacation or traveling or something. And he wrote and hosted his own episode. And it was all about identity. It was really beautiful. And what I loved is that then people took it and they turned it into an identity tag. And all of these other individuals were doing the same thing. So I just want to hear, as somebody who is so familiar with the topic and I think is really good at expressing your own identity, what are your thoughts on identity? Can we just talk about that for like 45 minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, bring it.
Okay. Well, my general thoughts on identity are that I think it's a very important tool. Mm-hmm. I think that it helps people express themselves in a concise way to other people. That's one of my favorite things about identity. And I think that a lot of times it can kind of get accidentally conflated with other things. For example, I don't consider identity to be prescriptive in any way. So if you identify as something, personally, I don't think that should limit any of your behavior or choices moving forward. So it's really all about like you. And so my general thoughts on identity are that it is a tool, like I said, and that it can be really helpful, but also sometimes gets conflated and then can be sort of oppressive in those situations if you're not paying close attention.
I like it. I was thinking, I think I went to a church garage sale.
Okay.
And they had the Enneagram book. and I thought about you.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because you do color code,
The
right?
color code, yeah.
But have you done Enneagram too?
I've done the Enneagram in the sense that I kind of like explored my own personality and tried to familiarize myself with the basic tenets of the theories.
Yeah.
I have an Enneagram book that I peruse. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I definitely know about it.
See, because the way that you phrase that about it not being prescriptive, I really love, because my tendency is to look at the color code or Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Harry Potter sorting hat, etc. Like, and this is me, and now this is how I behave, and if you are this, then this is how you will behave, and this is how we will get along, and now the like script made, done, check. And I love hearing that I can own those things, but that doesn't determine who I am or how I relate to others.
Definitely.
It's beautiful.
It's cool. I think especially like what's interesting is they're important, like maybe, so, okay, to put on the opposite side of prescriptive, I would maybe put predictive. And I think that tools like the color code and the Enneagram are really helpful from a predictive perspective, where you're trying to just generate an idea of how something might happen in order to be better prepared. Mm-hmm. But when you accidentally, and this happens like totally subconsciously on accident to all people, like this happens to me all the time, when you use those tools instead to like formulate a behavior or make a decision, or if you use it to like confine another person's actions into a box of what you believe the reason is around it, and you don't give that person freedom to be a whole, well-rounded, complex person, that's where I feel like it's troubling. So I think using it in a predictive fashion, probably most of the time going to be fine. But when it's prescriptive, it can be damaging.
Okay, so what are some of your identities?
Okay. Like I could probably say so many things.
So I could be predictive, not prescriptive.
Okay. Well, so in social justice theory in general, there's kind of like the big 8. So that's, I don't know them all 8 off the top of my head, but I know that it's like gender, sexuality, I think like race and ethnicity, class. And so thinking from that perspective, identify as non-binary. That's my gender identity. I identify my sexuality as queer. I identify as a mixed race individual. I have a white parent and also a parent who is a person of color, Venezuelan. I identify as polyamorous. That's my relationship structure identity. And also, but identity gets so much broader. Like if we're talking about the color code, I identify as a yellow. If we're talking about...
You're a yellow? I'm a yellow.
Yeah.
Did we know that we're both yellows?
I didn't know that we're both yellows.
Oh, okay. We're both yellows.
Enneagram, I identify as an 8. I don't know if you... Yeah, I think you do. I think you identify with an Enneagram number. I would say I'm an 8.
I don't remember mine. I don't know. It's similar to Stevie's, but keep going.
Stevie's an 8. So if it's similar, it's
Similar,
probably
like
5 or 2 or 8, or it could be 7 or 6.
Never mind. I have no idea.
But if you step even further back, like you were saying, I identify as a YouTuber, as a writer, I identify as a partner, and a sister and daughter. Those ones get tricky, but that's where I'm at with that. And a pet mom and 100 other things.
Sister and daughter, not child and sibling.
Right. I would say that in my experience, my evolving and continuous experience with language, that's where I'm at right now, is I'm kind of facing words like sister and daughter and mom, and wrestling with them. And it's interesting because one of my brothers, Cameron, is like my best friend. And he's so, so important to me. And our relationship means the world to me. And I'm just so excited about that and grateful for that. And the word sister is a huge part of how he feels about me. And I don't think that if I ever said like, hey, let's use a different term to describe this relationship, that he wouldn't be receptive. It's more about the fact that with him, there's very much a tenderness in the use of the word sister. And so for me, I'm sitting with that, because sister usually describes a person who identifies as a woman, and I do not identify as a woman. So even though I think maybe it might not be the most apt word, it does have kind of a sentimental element. And so, yeah, I have feelings about it. I feel things about the word sister, and I'm also maybe not so willing to to change that with him right now. And it's similar with daughter, that just really means something to my mom. It means something from her. And so it's not something I'm pushing on right now. I'm just sitting with it.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. I have a friend, she has, I don't know how long she's identified as a woman, but maybe 20 years now, and has adult children who call her, at least one of them calls her dad or daddy still. And it doesn't seem to affect her at all. It's that kind of, that is how we are relating to each other. And it doesn't have anything to do with my identity.
Right.
And so I think that's up to you, and it can be really empowering. It could also be really triggering, but it's for you to own and decide. And cool.
Yeah.
Good on you.
Thanks.
All right. What about Harry Potter?
Harry Potter, I'm a
Hogwarts?
Ravenclaw.
You're a Ravenclaw.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's like wings or like secondaries in Harry Potter, but my secondary would be probably Slytherin.
Okay.
But I definitely would not put myself in the category of like primary Slytherin. It doesn't work. But if there's any secondary influence, that was what it would be.
I like it. I'm learning all sorts of things about people through that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. What's yours?
And then judging them. Trying not to. Mine is Gryffindor.
Okay.
And I'm yellow in the color code. So our thing is fun, right?
Fun, yeah, and pleasure.
Fun and pleasure. And then I can't remember my Enneagram. And let's see, what else? Identify as female, daughter, sister, sometimes mom. Not sometimes in the way of like, I am not their mom sometimes, but it depends on how deep that identity goes.
Sure.
Homeowner, pet owner, partner, monogamous despite my best efforts, and hetero despite my best efforts.
Well, I think probably that like a good, solid, thoughtful, intentional exploration of monogamy and or sexuality is great. I think that deserves an applause.
Thanks.
Well,
I mean, those are I can't even say those are my behaviors. But in my head, I have designed a whole world where I have lots of partners and they're all genders, and it's a great fun old time. It's just that's not what I end up behaving like.
Yeah,
like in my head, I also have a Pinterest-style house and a beautiful garden and a dog that doesn't need 24-hour care. But in reality, I love my garage sales.
Have a recording studio and maybe like a gold record, a record that went gold, something like that.
Ooh.
That's just my head. That's not how it works out in the real world. But my reason for saying that it deserves an applause is that in a society that wants everyone, or I guess encourages everyone to blindly accept heterosexuality and monogamy, it's pretty important to be in a position where you've interrogated those identities and come to the conclusion that that's where you actually, authentically and autonomously reside, as opposed to you're just accepting those identities because that's what was laid out for you.
When have you done that recently? Interrogated an identity. I'm asking myself that as well. I'm trying to think.
I very recently considered, I guess I'm considering applying for a writer's retreat. And yes, it's very exciting. And the writer's retreat is specifically for women, trans people, and non-binary people of color. And so it creates this space where those individuals can workshop and, share space and ideas and be creative, sort of to the exclusion of other types of people, in order to foster that community and that shared experience.
Yeah.
And the reason I haven't already applied is that I am interrogating in this situation my whiteness. So I shared in the beginning, I identify as a person of mixed race background, and that's really important to me. It's a huge part of my life. The Spanish language and traditional Venezuelan foods, like my whole mom's side of my family is Venezuelan, and it's been a part of my upbringing and my experience, and yet I am white. I also have a white parent, and I am very white presenting, white passing. And so I'm not really sure what to make of that in this context, because I'm very much on a personal level interested in being a part of this writer's workshop and this retreat. And at the same time, very aware of and wanting to be very conscientious of the potential for my presence to be detrimental to the purpose or to the experience of the other people. So being a person who's white, I have privileges that are not afforded to other people who, especially visually, do not look white. And also, historically, white people are the oppressor, especially in this country, but in general, thinking more about like people from Spain and conquering South America and that kind of thing. So that's sort of hard when you're trying to cultivate a space that's very specific to identities and experiences. And then for me, as someone who, yes, I have that background and I also have this other background of being white and having a white parent. So where do I fit? Do I add to this element or do I take away from it? And how do I make sure that if I'm taking away from it, that I step back and that I make sure that space is available for someone else?
Do you get to put that in your application?
That's where I'm at right now. I think that's my current theory for approaching it, is that I would just like to say that and then allow the kinds of people who have that expertise and also experience of they run the retreat and they've been there and they know what it is, to then be able to have them decide, since they have just better tools to decide, I think.
Do you want to hear my experience?
Yeah, I do.
So when I was, I think, 27, I had my first foster daughter, and she didn't stay with me until she was 18. And so there was this time where I didn't have a kiddo, but I had been a mom and I was self-employed, and there was a contest being presented by a local magazine saying that we will give you business classes in advertising for momtrepreneurs. And they just had this open call to anyone who identified as a mom and an entrepreneur. And I decided that I was going to put forth an application with that information out there and let people choose. And I remember the people who coordinated that contacted me and said, we've had some pushback on people saying you're not a mom. And I had to really pull it apart myself more and say, but am I not? If someone's kid goes to treatment or to jail or moves in with another parent or dies, do you suddenly not become a mom? Or is it because the identity is foster and that culture is more of a temporary mindset for a lot of people? But I kept letting it go and really turning it over to the community to decide, because they voted and then they chose, and I won, which is really exciting.
That is exciting.
Yeah. And I think also what it did, though, is helped me to understand my relationship to motherhood a little bit more and be more open to what guardianship and parenthood and all of that looks like in a diverse way.
Right. I really appreciate you sharing that story with me. I think there's a lot there. That's a cool story and a cool experience, and congratulations on winning that contest.
Well, thank you.
And on motherhood and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, it made a huge difference in my life.
Cool.
Because I got to learn a lot from that, but also, do that introspection on identity and decide what that meant to me. So you get to do the same thing. And it's a writing workshop. It makes sense to write it down.
Yes, it does. And to be perfectly fair, they also choose applicants based on merit. You have to submit a writing selection with your application. So maybe it's the case that like all this stuff I'm worrying about with my identity is a limiting factor, and maybe it's the case that it's not. And also my particular writing at this point in my life wouldn't earn me a spot in the first place. So I think it's also probably just mixed with some apprehension about the entire process of vulnerability and potential for rejection.
Tough.
It's tough. It's tough being creative, and it's tough when you are self-employed or you want to be self-employed. I think those, at least for me, those things are related to each other.
Do you think it is more comfortable to be rejected on the identity front versus the merit front?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. because it's not something you can help, right? Your identity. So if you're being rejected, because it's not even hardly rejection, it's more like disqualification. It's like you're not going to be able to come into this space because it's not for you. I can 100% hear that and take that and be very...
As a person of a lot of privilege.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm just saying in general, I think a space not being for me is something that I understand. Whereas, something that I'm doing not being good enough, there's a lot more there that I have less pre-preparation for that than I do to be able to acknowledge and accept when something is not for me.
Interesting. We could unpack that for hours. I have a related question, though.
Okay.
If you were saying that you're 50% Venezuelan, or somewhere.
Yeah, my mom's Venezuelan. I think percentages get a little sticky because her mom is from Venezuela, born there, raised there, 2 Venezuelan parents. Her dad, I'm not totally sure about all of his heritage and lineage. I think he's French, mostly French or partly French. But so he's white, not like US American white, but white. And so, I don't know, I guess if you were going to calculate a percentage, 25% would probably be the most accurate guess.
Okay, so that's similar for me. My father's mother was Japanese.
Okay.
And everyone else would be European descent. So I wonder at what number it becomes something that I get to identify publicly with, or personally or culturally, what is acceptable, what is not, etc. Right?
I think that's one of the major, so like in the conversations I have had, like in social justice spaces, so in particular, I'm thinking about a retreat that I went on, and I was in a focus group where we were talking about being mixed race or having like multiple backgrounds from a racial or ethnic perspective. And the conversations I've heard have basically been like, it's not fair to look at it as numbers because I'm a whole person, I'm not 50% of this thing and 50% this thing. I'm just 100% me. But at the same time, yeah, it can also be, I think it's sticky. I think it's really convoluted because it depends, I think, on why you're asking. So for example, when I was in high school, I took it was either like a state test or it was a national test. I'm not really sure. It was some sort of standardized test. And you have to mark all your demographic information in it.
Oh, gosh.
Right.
I am having this. Yep. I know exactly. Yep.
So I marked everything that I would normally mark. I marked that they give you usually multiple boxes. So I marked white and I marked Hispanic and moved on with my life pretty much. And then I guess, I can't remember the name of the test, but I do remember the name of the award. So somebody probably knows the name of the test. But I got this certificate like a while later that said I was a National Hispanic Merit Scholar. And this was a very odd thing. It was an odd moment because in the one way I felt very affirmed. And in the other way, I was like, is this right? Like, should this be mine? I wasn't sure. I didn't really know. I still don't know. I think this is a perfect metaphor for what it feels like for me to be a person of like mixed race identity and background. And it actually said, I like dug a little deeper. It actually said that the award was for individuals who were 25% or more Hispanic, which I thought was just fascinating. But I was like, okay, well, I mean, I guess that's my answer, right? I'm qualified based on this interesting mathematical breakdown. But it didn't really make it it didn't simplify the emotional experience at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about it in terms of racialized groupings, but I'm also thinking about it from a sexuality perspective where it's like, okay, how many partners do I have to have in order to have a poly identity? And how many times do I have to go down on a vulva in order to have a lesbian identity? Or right? Or
0.
not? Exactly. Because the person doesn't even have to have a vulva.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a lot. Yeah. Zeros all across the board.
But I think we do that. There's a certain amount of 25% or less.
Right.
I haven't earned this identity.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think just to kind of, I guess, put a cap on my feelings about the mixed race situation for my personal identity, so my mom has a white parent and she lived in Venezuela until she was 12. So her entire childhood, she's in Venezuela. She came to America speaking very little English and was, like bullied and made fun of for that. And so my mom, even though she's also mixed, had this very like racialized, othered experience as a kid. And then, her family is a huge part of my life. And so I think for me, I struggle with the 25% thing a little bit. Like you were saying, I haven't earned the right to this. And at the same time, my experience tells me that I'm allowed to, embrace these things. This is my family, my language, my food, my people. Like this is the people I want to seek out and be around and identify with. And there's this whole privilege with the idea that I don't have to, which I try to be really thoughtful about. And at the same time, I want to. And so there's that balance. I think it's always just going to be a balance and a wrestling match because it's not simple. It isn't one or the other. It's both and.
Yeah. Well, because I think we're both in the same space of not wanting to take away
Absolutely
from those that don't maybe have white passing privilege, but also not wanting, for me at least, not wanting to discount the experiences of those members of my family. So if I don't mark Asian on that standardized test, did I just totally discount the fact that my grandmother was put in an internment camp?
Right.
And that was shitty and that her children were all bullied because of their racialized grouping? Like, what? So, yeah. The knots. Okay, what about a different identity? What about a sex one?
A sex one.
Let's pull it apart.
Okay, you pick.
Well, yeah, let's go into orientation.
Sexual orientation.
Because I alluded to earlier, right? Like, oh my gosh, am I a lesbian? Depends on how much pussy I've eaten. But it has nothing to do with whether or not you've gone down on those genitals because people have different bodies and different gender identities. And then it has nothing to do with behavior because you could be sexually attracted to someone and never perform oral sex.
Right. Yeah, and also because you could identify as lesbian and also identify as asexual and not be interested in sex at all from a sex perspective.
Okay, tell me about it.
But your relationship, well, I don't know. I guess there is the division between a romantic orientation and a sexual orientation. But I also think that in most cases, they're not so separated unless you specifically separate them out. If you tell someone that you identify as like basically homosexual and heteroromantic, then that means one thing. But if you leave one of those out, then people will fill in the blank with the other thing. So I think it's also complicated. Like if you just say, I'm a lesbian, then people are going to assume that you have romantic and sexual relationships with women. And so, it gets complicated because there's an assumption there. So you either have to add a word to clarify or you go with the assumption or... Yeah. But anyways, I think you can identify. Let me just go back to what I said in the very beginning.
Okay.
So I feel like this is my biggest thing as a person who loves words.
Oh, yay. Let's do this.
Official position is that language is meant to serve us and that we can and should use language to the extent that it helps simplify communicating our experience and that we shouldn't be like held to a standard, especially by others, but we also do this to ourselves, that we have to behave a certain way or meet a certain set of criteria based on language that we're using to describe ourselves. So if you say that you're a lesbian, that doesn't mean that when you have feelings for a person who's a man, that you should avoid them or suppress them or not act on them. Just because you've identified it as a lesbian. Does that make sense? The language is meant to serve you, not to confine you.
That's beautiful.
That's my position.
Aw. Okay, so let's play it out.
Okay.
The person identifies as a lesbian.
Okay.
And then they have feelings for a man.
Sure.
And then they act on those feelings for a man.
Uh-huh.
Do they get to call themselves and identify as a lesbian?
The word, I'm getting like, my blood pressure is rising at the word get. This is like exactly kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, nobody should be able to tell anybody what they do or don't get to identify as. I find that to be just reprehensible. So,
Oh, I totally agree. I'm
yeah.
using the language because that's how we say it.
I agree.
But,
socially, that's how it's presented.
Right.
So my thoughts on that are, you get to identify as whatever you want. I think probably the person is likely to interrogate that identity, but it's not necessary that they change it if they don't feel like something else works better. Plus, let's say they were going to change their identity. There's a whole period of time where they're maybe learning about other identities, or they're talking to people who identify in certain ways, or they're trying to sort out, like, is this experience common among lesbians? And if it isn't, what kind of people is it common among? And do I share things with those people? Do those words feel good to me? And while they're going through that process, they're probably still going to be identifying as a lesbian, because what else would they be doing? You know, that's the term they were using. So while they're exploring or interrogating, it would probably stay the same. So I think, you know, if you have an experience that causes you to wonder if a word doesn't fit you anymore, you might feel compelled to interrogate that identity, but it's not a necessity. It's more about, is the language still serving you? And you're the one who gets to decide that.
Yes. And I would say that to me, in all, you know, like all episodes of Sexplanations, the YouTube show and the podcast, that I am really mindful of context and intent. And if a person their intent is to bully or harm that cultural space by taking an identity that they don't actually have, they don't identify that way, but they are owning it to spite that group, that's not okay with me.
I agree. And I can't also say that I've ever seen that.
You've never seen a cis man say, I'm a lesbian, and demand to be called a lesbian?
Only on the L word. That's the only time I've ever seen it. And honestly, it was a very long time ago, so I don't remember that much about that situation. You have? That's a common thing?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's a common thing, but I think it's a thing that people do, or
interesting.
People say, yeah.
I agree. I just haven't had a lot of personal experience with that. That sounds not good. Like you're just trying to make a problem for somebody else.
Well, I think a lot of it came out with the bathroom debate, people saying, "Well, I'm just going to identify as a woman," and they don't identify as a woman, but they are
I'm with you.
Abusing the labeling systems that we use to form a culture.
Sure,
and that I'm not okay
problematic.
with.
No, that's very problematic.
Yeah,
for me, I've changed the way I identify my sexuality twice, and both times it was kind of okay, I'm not sure that this is serving me anymore. But it's kind of complicated too, because there's this pressure that one can feel toward having to, I guess, update everyone. Like, hey, friends and family, I know you've been thinking about me as this, but in fact, that's not so accurate. And then that can be so awkward too. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have to talk to everybody about it. So I really just didn't. And that was my personal choice. I was like, I'm going to change the way I identify because that makes sense to me. I'm just going to start using this new term that I use. And if somebody asks me about it, I'm open to a conversation. That's different. But I don't want to have to send out like a bulletin updating everybody about my various identities so that they, have their black notebooks, updated. So.
And how did that change settle in, I guess? Because there's a difference between choosing something and having that change occur maybe within you. Am I articulating that well?
Say more about that.
So I guess I'm trying to get at that you probably didn't make a choice to have a new identity, but the change happened within you and you made a choice to express that.
Yeah.
Or to own that, whatever that change was. I don't know.
No,
maybe not.
No, I get what you're saying. I would say that more so than like choosing, like, I'm going to be this now. It was more along the lines of I was learning more about myself. So one of the times I changed the word I used to describe my sexuality was in high school, and the other one was in college. And so I'm experiencing new and different things. I'm exposed to different ideas, different people, different like scholarly work, different literature, language. And I'm more than anything realizing that what I was before describing, so in this case, I used to identify as lesbian. What I was before describing my sexuality as lesbian was actually just sort of a finite picture of my sexuality. And with more knowledge, more experience, seeing my sexuality behave in more situations, I realized that lesbian just didn't describe the whole picture. I had been describing the part I saw, and then as I saw more, I realized that that word, it wasn't so effective to describe what I now understood to be my sexuality. So I would say my knowledge of my sexuality grew and evolved, and so my language for describing it grew and evolved, as opposed to changed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like it. And so do you have an up-and-coming term that you are
Up and coming.
like that's percolating, something that takes the etymology that you love or what you want to have your identity marker be?
Queer is comfortable for me right now. It's not something that, it isn't something that it feels like it's sitting poorly. So the biggest reason that I started to look at my identity when I was identifying as lesbian is that I was doing a ton of work exploring my gender and trying to learn about that and just make sure that I could speak about my experience in the best way possible with the tools I had. And the common definition of lesbian is a woman who, is interested in other women. And I realized that I never thought about the fact that identifying as lesbian had this sort of subtle implication of my own gender.
Yeah.
And once my gender became something more complicated, then I started to feel like also I was understanding other people's gender in a more complicated way. And, woman who's interested in other women, it stopped describing me and it stopped describing the people I was interested in. And so I was like, all right, so it's time for me to give this language back to the people who it serves and to find something else. And queer works really well for me because it's a conversation opener. It doesn't mean anything really besides I'm not straight. And if you want to know any other detail about my sexuality, that would be something that you would have to actually talk to me to understand. You're not going to be able to have a very clear idea of my relationships or my interests sexually without, a dialogue. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that it makes room for more conversation.
So now I'm super curious about reclaiming words that have been derogatory in the past, because in all forms of identity, this happens where somebody uses a word to put down a culture and then hopefully it gets reclaimed or it dies. And with queer as your model, what are your thoughts on that?
I know that there are living human people who feel very, very passionately that queer is not a word that should be used to describe oneself or especially a group of people. And the reason they feel that way is because that they have had the word queer used as a weapon against them. And some people, even in the context of a slur being yelled at them in the midst of a hate crime or, while they're being harmed or aggressed upon by people who are not accepting of their identity. So I respect that, and I want to make sure that to the best of my ability, I'm aware of it. And I think I'm coming from a place where I came out for the first time 14 years ago. And since then, queer has always been a term that was available to me. So it's not something that through my experience and my life that I have felt that I was a part of reclaiming it, if that makes sense. I think the heavy reclaiming happens when people who have had a slur used against them choose to be empowered by it. And I think that work was done before me. And so generationally, I benefit from that work that was done by people to reclaim queer, and I'm sensitive to the fact that not everybody agrees with that choice. I use the word not so much because it's political. I think reclaiming is inherently political, but more so just because it fits me. I like it. And I think I'm also, there's a heavy kind of privilege undertone too, that I have the option to like it because it was never used as a weapon against me.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. And I'm in the generation that is kind of in between the two. Mm-hmm. It was definitely reclaimed by the time that I became cognizant of what was going on. But at the same time, I was very aware of the people that was so hurtful
Right.
toward. And so I had to be very careful about when it was used and by whom. I was doing HIV prevention work at the time. And so you have the generation that is, they were affected by the virus and they were part of the LGBT community and all the horrible, horrible things that happened during those years. And I wouldn't ever say the word. I wouldn't have it so that the younger generations were saying it to them. It was like very considerate of those spaces. And I think that younger generations have that wherewithal. I hope so. But when I am in other spaces with the reclaimed mentality about it, that's everyone's favorite word to use to describe themselves, to not be so boxed in with gender and orientation, but to have something that shows their unique flavor.
Yeah. It's a special word in the sense that, like I said, it's very vague. It's multidimensional. It can have pretty much any meaning that you want to apply to it under the umbrella of I don't identify as straight. And so I think that's appealing to a lot of people who feel that sexuality is just not so simple as you like men or you like women and that's it, and so the nuance to it of being able to feel like you can kind of carve your own space out of it, it's very exciting. This word gets to mean what I want it to mean. It's almost like the definition of it is fluid enough that each person feels like they're staking their own claim on the word when they choose to identify with it. And I think that's positive. It's positive for me. But I also recently was invited to an event that was called Queers and Beers. And it was like this get together for LGBTQ community at a brewery. And I witnessed that in the event page for the event, that there were people who were not pleased at all about the use of the word queer in the name of the event. And, were pretty vehemently saying, why would I want to have a beer with someone who thinks that it is acceptable to use this slur in the name of the event? And that was a new thing for me. That's not really something that I've been around or experienced. I don't have any people in my life who identify as LGBT that are from a generation or two above me. I mean, maybe one generation, some mentors and leaders from my university, but nobody any older than that. And so that wasn't something I really, like how you were saying you had firsthand experience with that, and I really didn't.
Time for some conversations.
Yeah.
We could do that as SEXtra Credit homework.
Okay, great.
Have conversations with members of the LGBT community that would have, been around when that was used as a slur. I mean, it's used as a slur still.
Sure, but it's so much, okay, to me, I definitely am not going to speak for anybody else. For me, it's just so empty. It's almost laughable. It's like, that's really adorable that you think that word is going to hurt my feelings. Because it's not. It's my word. What are you going to do with it that is going to be hurtful? For me, there are way worse things that people could say. And so that's where I'm at with that. But of course, yes, it is still used in that way. Just in my experience, it really actually does lose power based on the fact that it belongs to me first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another thing we could talk for hours about. Language, where it comes from, where it's going. I keep wondering where we're going to be, especially with gender, because I don't think that we have a solid foundation for where we're at right now. I think we're using the old language to communicate new concepts, and it's not a good match. We need new words. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Havelock Ellis. One of the early sexologists came up with the words homosexuality and heterosexuality. And he said when he was doing it, he knew that that was not a good fit. And yet those were the ones that stuck with society. And I think that, gosh, it's gonna be so much fun to see where it goes. But this transition period of we need to utilize the words we have because that's our language to get to concepts that we're not fully grounded in. It's tricky.
It is tricky. It's very tricky. Also, though, fun, in my opinion, and exciting, like you were saying. There's just so many cool things that can happen when you're willing to be like thoughtful and playful with language and trying to describe concepts in the best way that you can with what you've got. And I think especially in the culture and the age of the internet, those things just take new form and evolve so rapidly because they happen in these micro communities, like these little niche spaces. Like I'm thinking about like 2012 Tumblr was just like a queer and gender mess culture. It was just like, we have feelings. How do we talk about it? And so seeing things happen there where like it's a post with like 20 different people's thoughts and like what comes out of it is like, what about this? That's always very exciting to me. I'm like, holy moly, these people are collaborating and it's so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, because of language, right? That
Right.
The hacked together words that allow us to have the conversation so that we can continue to grow it. It's very powerful. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a friend of mine who was doing a lot of this research and work, and we were saying that I was saying that I wanted language to go from where it has been, which is inefficient and ineffective, to this whole new set that's perfect and glowing and flawless. And he was like, yeah, Lindsay, you want to take everyone to the edge of the cliff and push them off and see if they fly. And they can't do that. They have to have steps on the way to get there. It's like, but then we end up using these words that are faltered. And so be it, because those are the words that we communicate with, right? They serve us to get to the next place.
Yeah. I think also sort of a very human desire to not change is hard to reconcile with that. So like people who say, for example, why should I have to learn this whole new set of words just to make this, quote, this is not my own feelings, quote, small portion of the population, unquote, feel better. And it's like, for me, it's like, wow, what a limited way of seeing this situation. But okay, if it truly is the case that your life is so isolated from people who would benefit from you making that change, then I guess that's for you to decide. But that's always, I think, a hard element for me is people who are just like,
Lazy?
lazy, intellectually lazy. No, I don't quote that. People who are like, you know what? I don't care about this. I hear you saying that this is important to you. I don't think it's important. And I resent the assertion that I should find it important. That's always this very like wide eye for me moment. I'm like, wow, okay. But I mean, I'm not going to try to tell that person something different than what they're saying, but I do find it very interesting.
Yeah. Unfortunate.
And unfortunate.
It takes practice. It absolutely does to rewrite some of those things in your mind. Or I think we are so cued from an early age to read things like jawline and posture and like whether or not a person crosses their legs, et cetera. We're like constantly paying attention to that nuanced human behavior to send signals so that we can categorize. And then you go in this box and then I know how to treat you. And it's worth it if you do it to change and grow and strengthen yourself with practice. Because then, like you said, I'm not just putting myself into this prescription or this formula, and I can behave in all sorts of ways and allow people to do that without feeling a sense of resentment because they didn't act out like I expected them to.
Yep.
Work it. Cool. All right, so Kegels.
Feel your kegels if you're able. Main squeeze.
Want to do some?
Okay. You might have to give me maybe like a quick tutorial. I'm familiar with the concept, but maybe
Sure.
some description
I'm
would be
happy
good.
to do that.
Okay.
I've started seeing a physical therapist, so I'm going to learn how to do them hopefully better than the ones that I've made up in my mind.
Great.
Or read about. Because basically, you're using the same muscles that you would to start or stop urination.
Okay.
Your pubococcygeus or your PCs are that pelvic flooring that holds together all your genitals, your anus,
Okay.
urethra, etc., and decides whether or not you urinate, defecate, contract.
Sure.
Yeah. And if you work them, then your orgasms will be better.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks for the base knowledge.
So you would basically just do one by clenching like you're stopping urination and then relaxing, but unless you have to pee or you push pee out because you decide to pee on the furniture, then you won't actually urinate.
Sure. It's just like a phantom
Yeah.
stopping of a
Phantom
urination
pee.
stream. Phantom pee.
Yeah.
Great.
And so we'll do a count of 8 up and then a count of 8 down.
Okay. So 16 total.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I'll just count to 16.
Sure.
Do you want me to? I'll list an identity,
Okay.
and then you list an identity, and then I'll list one, and we'll each do 8
Okay.
new
sounds
ones,
good.
ones that we haven't said so far.
Oh my gosh. Nothing we've said so far. All right. I'm excited. Let's go.
We can do this.
I gotta think. Okay.
Ambivert.
Ambivert. Is that like introvert, extrovert, but both?
Yeah.
Okay. Cyclist.
Gardener.
Farmer.
Ex wanting to wait until marriage. Like former person who wanted to wait until marriage.
Okay. Catholic.
Currently?
No, I'm not Catholic. I'm just listing identities. Do they have to be my identities? Well, we gotta go all the way back to the beginning on that in that case.
That's really funny.
I'm not a farmer. I know a farmer, but I'm not one.
Oh,
I'm not a cyclist either. I have a bike.
this is great. I'm glad you're just putting out identities.
You didn't say they had to be my
perfectly.
identities. All right,
Perfect.
I'll change direction.
Okay. Are you clenching too?
Yeah,
Okay,
every
me
time.
Too. Good. I'm still clenching.
Oh, you just hold it the whole time?
I just
You said relax.
Just fun for fun.
Okay. Okay. Artist.
Oh, that's a good one. Faculty brat.
What does that mean?
That means that I was raised at a boarding school.
Interesting. U.S. citizen.
Daughter of the Revolution that I guess has not gone through official certification.
Okay.
And I don't even know if it's a good thing anymore or not.
Oh, I only have like one bell in the distance ringing about what that means.
I think it means that my relatives came over on the Mayflower.
Oh.
I mean,
they were fleeing religious persecution, so that's hard to fault, but it sounds like that they did not do some great stuff once they got here.
yeah.
Yeah. Reader.
Oh, I'm definitely not that. Researcher.
Lifelong learner.
Doctor of Human Sexuality.
Oh, I know. Polymath.
Polymath. Mm-hmm. Is that like a polyglot except for math? So you speak
sort of.
multiple mathematical languages?
So the root poly, obviously meaning many. In this context, math is, I don't know what the reason for using the word math is, but a polymath is someone who has skills and interests in a bunch of different areas. So like someone who's a playwright and a philosopher and an engineer would be a polymath.
But we don't know why math.
I don't know why math.
If you know, let us know in the comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please
Okay.
do.
That's fun. I think we've done way more than 16.
Probably.
Any others that we should throw out there? I'm the oldest of some odd number of grandchildren, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, something
Whoa.
like that.
That's a lot. I'm from Colorado. I'm a Coloradan.
I'm from Ohio, but I was born in New York.
I was born in Virginia, but I don't identify with that.
Yeah, me neither.
I didn't live there very long, that's why.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a pretty decently rounded picture.
Good job, us.
Good job, us.
Don't judge us. Just love us the way we are. Give us room to have all sorts of growing identities.
Yay.
Yay. Okay, so SEXtra Credit homework.
Assignments are not always bad, so here's some Sextra Credit.
I would like them to talk to people from another generation, but if there's something else you want to add.
I think that's good homework. And I think, too, talking to someone of an older generation with an identity that you hold. So, like, for me, it would be important to talk to someone of an older generation who identifies as LGBT. But for some other person, there might be like a more salient identity that having that conversation with an elder would be more beneficial.
Okay. You want me to hook you up with people?
Heck yeah, you know some?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course I do.
Great.
Do you know people who are over 40? What?
Wait, is that the generation? I thought it was like over like 60.
Yeah, but still, there are a lot of people over 60.
You know them? Wait, that are also LGBT?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, definitely. You definitely got to hook me up.
Really? You don't know people that fall into those demographics? Oh my goodness.
I don't. And also, I have only been in Montana for like a year, so I don't know that many total people of all age brackets.
Well, have you been to the community center?
One time, and they were gone for lunch.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to introduce you to all the people.
Great. Mm-hmm. SEXtra Credit homework for me.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce me to someone?
Okay. Who?
Do you know anyone over 60?
My grandma's.
Okay. I'll meet your grandmas.
Okay. What identity are they going to share with you?
I don't know. I'll just talk to them.
Okay.
We'll trade.
Great.
Excellent. We've done our jobs.
Lovely.
Thank you for being on the Sexplanations podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Good. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you also to Callie from Cinema Studios for helping, to Complexly for production, and Count Boogie for the jingles. And Coram Paro, I'm still learning.